On today's episode of the AEC Disruptors, we have a good friend of mine, Josh Cruz, Regional Healthcare Practice Leader at Nelson Worldwide. How's it going, man?
Good. How are you? Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. I'm glad we were finally able to do this. We've tried this a few times and, and now is the day. So before we talk, we've worked together. I know a little bit about your background, but why don't you set the stage? Tell us a little bit about, who you are, what's your background, and it can also help lead into here. We're going to talk about this idea of healthcare design, how it's evolving, and I think that background helps set the stage.
Sure. So I've been a healthcare architect, practicing healthcare architect for almost 15 years now. Started my career early on at Gresham Smith and Partners as an intern, right? Learned a lot of things about how buildings come together and about how healthcare design happens. Connected with there at the time, Sheila Bosch was their director of research, and she kind of led me to Georgia Tech in the Centigrade Design Lab there with Craig Zimmering and Jennifer Dubose, that wonderful program there that specializes in evidence-based design. And I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the practice, the way it's evolved, the way it's come to be, and the practical implications of that, how you practically apply evidence-based design to healthcare design and architecture in general. So that's kind of where my career springboarded into the practice of healthcare architecture, and it spanned from medical office buildings, physician practice design, all the way to ground up high-rise hospitals. So I've kind of run the gamut of a few projects that have a broad range. Today, I am regional practice leader for Nelson in the Southeast. So from Charlotte to Miami, all projects that are medical office buildings, hospitals, interior renovations, and even a couple big box renovations. We'll talk about that a little bit later too. It's an exciting new evolution in healthcare design. So kind of run the gamut here, man, of a lot of different things that we practice in.
I think the first time I met you was when we worked at CDH, and you were finishing up the Paulding Hospital. And didn't Paulding? I mean, there was some special things about that hospital, was there not?
Yeah, there definitely was a lot of special things about that hospital and the way that project evolved over time. Even Wellstar Paulding Hospital, it's a big hospital in a rural area, just outside of Metro Atlanta. And again, Georgia Tech was involved in that. The Centigrade Design Lab was involved in that. The Center for Health Design. So a lot of research went into that. I guess kind of the gold star that hospital was predicated on was responsible design, appropriateness, and stewardship. We did a lot of great things, a lot of organizational things that moved that organization into a standard of care, that improved the ability to provide care to that community. And it was all about being appropriate with design and about being good stewards of the budget and aligning that. We're going to talk about that in target value design. So I think that's a great springboard into this conversation. That project, I wish I could take credit for it, man, but there was a great team there, CDH, Mary Lindeman, Bill Chadwick, and those guys, leading the effort. I started as a lowly intern on that project, but by the end of it was, assistant project manager, because it spanned such a long portion of my career. So yeah, I'm growing up in a project like that that's just steeped in evidence-based design. You learn all the tricks of the trade. You learn how the language speaks. Great planners on that, Health Facilities Partners with Georgianne Burns. She was able to just guide us along the way and really shape the knowledge creation that happened during that project too.
I think that's why I was interested to talk with you. Obviously, we're good friends here, but I approach business in general from the strategy perspective, and I think there's something to be said when we're designing with evidence-based design in mind. It kind of has more of that strategy feel to it. It feels like we're being more systematic in our approach of what we add or what we do, and at least that resonates with me. That's kind of the way I think.
Could we take a time out here, and could you define evidence-based design for the
For people
contractor
that
folk
don't know.
who don't know what that
Sure,
is?
sure. So
That's why
evidence-based
we have
design.
Jackson.
Yeah, thanks, Jackson. I appreciate it, man. Keep us true. So evidence-based design is first and foremost a process of decision making, and it's based on credible research and evidence. So the soapbox that I like to stand on is evidence-based design is a process not a series of outcomes. Unfortunately, there is no silver bullet, right? That you can, if you use evidence-based design, you're going to have more X, or if you use evidence-based design, you'll end up with more Y. Those variables are indicative of the process itself. Now, there may be a large proportion of projects that end up with the more X variable, natural light, larger windows, right? They may lead that way. And I think you're going to find that 100% of the time that's the case for natural light. But you still have to work the process, because by definition, evidence-based design, EBD, is a process. And that process starts at the very beginning by involving all stakeholders and defining a series of guiding principles that really help structure the project. And then the part that usually gets missed is setting the hypothesis of the project, what we think is going to happen. If we establish these guiding principles, here's the outcomes we think we're going to get, and then testing that along the way, and then in the end, publishing and sharing your results. Architects, we're really good at holding tight to what our strategies are, and we're really good at being secretive about behind the curtain. But in the end, if we publish that, we grow that evidence base, and that elevates the practice altogether.
That was a great definition. And not to hijack this, but could you see predictive analytics playing a role in evidence-based design?
I do. I think that setting the hypothesis stage gets missed quite a bit on EBD projects, and it's the piece that's the research arm that's usually outside of the architect's scope. So whether it's a third party with the design lab, or an institute like Texas A&M or Clemson that comes in and does research, or even the research
Don't say
arm.
Texas A&M to him.
Sorry, my bad. Sore subject. We'll talk college football later. That's a whole nother conversation.
He loves Texas A&M.
That's my old spot.
So Clemson also has a program. David Allison, those guys have great research that gets embodied into these types of projects. So I do think that predictive analytics could play a role in that, and I do think that would help connect the architect to the research entity, because that's usually the weakest connection on an EBD project, is connecting back to the research and then conducting research. So if you're using predictive analytics, I think your supposed hypothesis could intentionally be measured even better.
Jackson is he loves to talk about Texas A&M anytime he has. So you've opened the door. Good job.
Yeah, I thought I had reached my quota when we had the A&M professor on, but you just served it up on a silver platter. I'm just glad to hear that A&M is contributing to the industry like they always have. So
nice. Are you still a Gator fan, Josh?
No, I'm not a Gator fan. I am a Gator. So I'm alumni of the University of Florida. And that, yes, I am a Gator who has a great research program in healthcare design, by the way. Sheila Bosch used to be research director at Gresham Smith. She is now a PhD professor at University of Florida. So, it all comes full circle, right? That's healthcare design is such a small, intimate industry. We all know each other and work with each other regularly. So yeah, it's the same group of folks. Texas Tech also has a great program too. So and more universities are now catching on to this and highlighting it as a skill set that architects could graduate into a profession in healthcare design. So it's exciting to see.
It's interesting because we had a talk with, as Jackson said, one of his professors from Texas A&M, and it was one of our couple episodes back, and it was an enjoyable episode because we talked about like how the university setting these professionals up for success, and we talked a lot about the research component. Something we may want to touch on later on, we might bring you back, is he had this great idea of have somebody from academia and somebody from the actual profession come together, and we have a discussion about something there and see the different perspectives. And so it is interesting because they really are kind of the lifeblood of the industry, because they're infusing all of this new research and they're influencing young professionals. So it was a neat tie in there.
I agree. I agree. They spark innovation. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so for today, we're kind of talking about this idea. We sort of set the stage of, from your perspective, how is healthcare design evolving, maybe even through your career, and then beyond as we enter into this post-pandemic world. I would suspect that there'll be various things, especially in healthcare. There are going to be different things that we have to think about, maybe we didn't think about before. When we started to set this talk, you kind of told us about 3 different phases, and we talked about how is the planning of design changing, how is the relationship with the contractor changing, and then how are we facilitating that. So in terms of planning, I want to touch on when we spoke, you kept talking about this idea of functional scenarios. And I'll be honest, I don't know what it is. And so I kind of want you to, how using that, like how is healthcare design changing, and where do you see the focus going moving forward?
Sure. So functional scenarios is a great topic, and I want to take a step back, just high level. It's a part of designing for flexibility, and a lot of this research actually came out of Georgia Tech, the Sim2Great Design Lab on flexibility, and the thing we're learning about flexibility, and the thing that's been documented several times, is it's not an innate characteristic of a built environment. A built environment cannot be indeterminately flexible. There has to be a defined start state and a defined end state. So flexibility, when we're talking about it, has to have a definition of what it starts with and what it ends with. And there may be a series of unknown scenarios in between. So in order to design for flexibility, and this is, and I would ashamedly haven't done this in a large part of my career, but more recently and since the pandemic, this is one of those things that keeps coming up over and over on every project, is we're designing in more flexibility. Well, that's one of those words that scares me, because that doesn't mean that we just plan for the unknown and we're taking a guess at it. We have to define what we're planning for in the future. And so we set what's called a series of functional scenarios. We're designing for scenario A today, a 5-year and a 10-year plan. And what could those spaces flex to? What could they adapt to become? And we run through a matrix, man. There's 3 different types of flexibilities across 5 different scales, and we define what this built thing needs to be in the end, and determine flexibility. And the way we do that is through a series of functional scenarios. So it's really just a definition of what the space functions as today and what we're planning the space to function as in the future. So once that functional scenario gets defined, then we can plan and inform the planning that way. One of the things that I had never planned for before last year was a global pandemic, right? I had never planned for that as part of a functional scenario. And now hospitals and health systems are asking us, hey, what happens if this happens again? How can we be prepared, right? Where are our drive-through clinics? Where are our testing sites? Where are our vaccination sites, mass vaccination sites? Can other spaces flex, like the World Congress Center? Can they flex to be able to administer vaccines? Do we need to have conference space that can do that? That is a functional scenario of a conference space as a vaccination site. We've never seen that before, but that is indeed one of the projects we're planning right now. It's a health system. They've got a conference space, but they want to be sure they can get people in and out in a singular flow, so that it could become a vaccination site in the future should we need it again. That type of flexibility and that type of functional scenario I had not seen before 2020. I don't think many of us had planned for those things before. So now we're seeing health systems become aware of those. We had planned for surge events, but not to the scale that we saw in 2020. We had planned for surge events in off-site conditions in campuses that could be retrofit or could be made to be healthcare delivery spaces, but nothing to the scale that we saw.
It's ironic. I don't know if it's ironic or not, but Jackson and I, one of our first episodes we did together, I guess it was right before the pandemic started, was on the 10-day hospital. And, we talked about like, oh, that could never happen here. We would never, there's too much red tape. There's too much bureaucracy to do. And then we fast forward now, and then it's interesting to look back. This idea of functional scenarios, I would think really could apply to any type of design, because
Absolutely.
Any project we do should have multiple use cases after the fact. So like we've had sustainable guest on, and for us to build a sustainable future, I think that just needs to be a foundational thing that we think about.
Do you think that this pandemic is going to have such a great impact that it's going to change functional design not only in hospitals, urgent cares, things like that, but also in places like schools, restaurants, hotels.
That's a great question. And I know there are folks on each side of that. And I'm not sure I've landed on a particular side of that argument just yet. I think it has forever changed the way we think about space design. I think it has forever changed the way we think about workplace, retail, and absolutely rethink. We're now rethinking healthcare, the way people are gathered, the way we ask people to wait. In an evidence-based process, waiting is waste, right? So now that has really come to the forefront because we're asking them to wait in what could be a potentially dangerous situation. So how is waiting reduced even more so? And so yeah, I do think it is going to change the way we inhabit space, the way we occupy space, the way we think about our social distancing. I think it does change that. I'm interested to see over time how much that ebbs and flows. And I think it could be regional, right? I think it definitely could be regional. We've definitely seen that in Georgia, that spaces in the more urban and metro areas, it's impacting at a greater scale than it is in rural Georgia. So I do think that that's going to play a role in it as well.
Because it's the idea of waiting. I went to the dentist, I don't know, a couple months ago because I chipped my tooth, and the whole experience was completely different, but actually kind of nice. I mean, I sat in the car until it was time for me to go inside. They came to me, I signed what I needed to do. I went straight into a room. And, part of me kind of just liked, I mean, if I'm gonna have to wait, I'd rather just wait in my car, the comfort of my own space. I wonder how many places are going to start to reconsider the amount of space that I need. Like these small, like MOBs, I don't need a waiting room. You could wait in your car if it's a standalone building. Or do we think that people are going to almost totally swing back? The pendulum's going to swing back all the way to the other side because it's like, you know what? I hated that so much. We're going back to the way it was.
Yeah, I think you're going to see a little bit of both. There's definitely a population that um, enjoys the insulation and protection and safety. And then there's a large portion of the population where a doctor's visit is the social interaction of the week.
Yeah,
Right?
that's a
That's
good
the
point.
happening thing. And so we talk about when we design waiting areas, sociofugal versus sociopedal. Sociopedal encourages interaction, and it has a lot to do with the practice type and the population that's coming in. And some folks will show up an hour before their appointment just to get that social interaction with people who are going through the same thing there. It's almost like a behavioral health. It's their counseling session for the week to go to the doctor's office and visit with people who are battling some of the same things they are. So I think that I don't know, man. I think that we're still going to have to wait and see how that happens. But to Jackson's point, it's going to be far more intentional now than it ever has been. That we're going to have to ask the question. The space is going to have to be designed intentionally for that functional scenario. So yeah, I agree, Jackson. Good point.
So when, if we were thinking a very simple example of functional scenario outside of a pandemic, I mean, what are other things that we're considering? I mean, so if we're laying out a space, and I guess a really cheesy example would be like if I had a big box and I needed to think through in 15 years, I might need 4 boxes inside this. So where do I place structure so I can accommodate for that? I mean, is that, in a rudimentary way, what we're really doing in terms of functional scenarios? Like what may it need to be in 10 years and 15 years?
Yeah, so some of those functional scenarios include growth, and that's what you're talking about, right? That's growth over time. That's definitely something that we've always considered for years. That is a functional scenario, but I think we're talking more about change in use, change in dynamic. A few years back, I want to say about 2 years ago, we designed the cognitive empowerment program for Emory Brain Health. And it's a program that doesn't exist anywhere else in the country by any other health system, right? It's a day program for those diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment. And the whole idea, the concept was that this was to be a living laboratory for these folks who've been diagnosed with MCI to come in, receive care, receive day program. At the time, there was no evidence-based pharmaceutical, no evidence-based medicine that would help with the disease, with the diagnosis, and there was there's no evidence-based therapies that would help as well. So everything was a trial. So you're designing a space that you don't know if it's going to work for any of it. And that's what made it interesting. That's what made it intriguing. So we designed spaces for researchers to be next to areas where the patients would come in and would go through these therapies. What we found out was that we designed a student space, which is your typical open ceiling, desk, collaborative student, workshop area next to what would be a space for yoga or gym or Tai Chi or dancing. So try these there so that students could observe while these were happening. What we found out was they opened the doors and the spaces got there was no delineation in space at all. So you've got acoustic problems in one area, you've got your space problems in another area, and it's a functional scenario that we didn't. Oh, by the way, they might not stay because we drew the lines. They might want more social interaction than we planned for. So then the space needed to evolve and to adapt, and we brought in an acoustician and get some of those things addressed. We designed with movable furniture and movable partitions so we can move things around so that we can create and shape the space that they need. So that's a functional scenario that we didn't plan for that showed up. But because we used flexible parts and pieces and a kit of parts, we were able to adapt for it. And we're still adapting for it.
Yeah. Flexibility seems to be important for just in general, all design. I mean, even, when we talk, we're experiencing this now. We're all work from home. And now there's this idea of, okay, well, what is it going to look like when we go back? And what does the office need to look like? And, that level of design, you have to be able to consider, like, how can this space be flexible? We see the same thing in education. We all think differently.
Absolutely.
Some of us want our own little pods. Some of us want a huge room for everyone to join. So with this idea of being flexible, functional scenarios, do you think that is like heavily dependent on evidence-based design, like having more, not just intuition, but fact that in research?
The business side of me wants to answer absolutely yes, and you should always call an expert in evidence-based design to help you with that. That's what I do all day, every day. So yes, absolutely, call me. We'll get it figured out. But no, overall in the industry, I think absolutely. I think that I think innovation and creativity are going to be steeped in research. I think it's one of those things where folks are going to want to read about it. They're going to want to hear about it. They're going to want to. I think there's a difference between the leading edge and the bleeding edge. I think we're going to see folks who are on the bleeding edge, just like they always have been, and companies are going to try to push that. And I think that's a great thing, and that's where innovation strives. But I think we're going to see a lot more folks move to that leading edge quickly, because it's going to help us retain talent and retain employees. And I think that's going to have to happen.
Yeah, the research innovation, they definitely seem to be they're always joined together. Even at Applied, as we're trying to build this innovative culture, there's that research component that if you don't have it, we all have great ideas, but we have to be able to consistently look out what's going on in our industries, understand what can or can't happen. And so it is pretty critical. So I could see it may even change the profession in general, because we recognize there's more functional scenarios we need to account for. We need to rely more on research. And organizations may change. There may be whole research departments to a lot of architecture firms that, that's all they do is R&D. Who knows, maybe in my future firm, that's how it'll go. Okay. So we've started to plan out the space. We're kind of designing the space, and that we evolve a little bit in terms of our relationship with the contractor. So, the reason I have Jackson as my co-host is we bring this separate perspective. And, it seems like for a lot of these projects, those conversations are happening a little sooner, hopefully not as adversarial. From your perspective, how are we evolving now in terms of how do you work with the contractor, and how has that relationship evolved and maybe will evolve post-pandemic?
We are seeing a heightened presence of general contractors, subcontractors, even in our early preliminary design, definitely by the schematic design phase. I know that we've got a couple projects that we call integrated project delivery, but it's more IPD light. The contracts aren't structured that way, but that's the way we're performing. The contractor has been involved from schematic design. Pricing is happening on a check set basis, right? Not even on a phase. No, we're not even waiting till the end of a phase. We're pricing check sets along the way. That's happening continual. I've got one project that we actually call it build design, because a lot of times the contractor is ahead of us on what we're trying to achieve, and we're bringing to the table ideas and concepts, and he's constructing it as we're building it, and it's one of those that we're hand in hand working with the client and working with the contractor more so today than I ever have in my career. We've had great contractors that have always practiced that way, and we've had good architects that have always done the same thing. So now we're just seeing it more and more. One of the tools that we're using, and then it seems to be I don't want to say a buzzword, but it keeps coming up, is target value design, and that's where you simply just set a budget early on in the process, and then we use a tool called Project Budget by Discipline. And you just set the budget per discipline for the project. That way, you're not stripping out lighting to pay for carpeting or cutting out carpeting to pay for the mechanical system. We know where those budgets are going to align early on in the process, and we can give that to MEP consultants and engineers and structural consultants, engineers. We know what systems are going to cost while we're designing, instead of after we've designed, we send it to them, we get pricing back, we reevaluate and design some more. It takes the a little bit of the iterative process out and streamlines it quite a bit for us, and we appreciate it so much having that expertise on the front end.
Yeah, I'm sure the owner really appreciates that as well.
Well, it's funny because more and more owners, that is their expectation now. It's not that they appreciate it and they're grateful for it. It's just that, hey, that's the way this project is going to go. We're going to be collaborative. We're going to be open book. The budget's on the table. Here's how much stuff costs from day one. And the owner's expectations are that we work that way and we collaborate that way.
They're getting more sophisticated in what they're
absolutely
wanting, and it takes just one architect to and a contractor to perform a certain way, spoil that owner, and then it becomes the standard for what we expect.
Yeah, I'd love nothing more than being the owner's easy button, right? That they call us or they call the contractor, we get together and we bring an opportunity that we found on the job site, or an opportunity we found in the documents. Some people call them problems. We call them opportunities. And we show three solutions, right? Here's solution 1, 2, and 3, and here's what they cost, and here's how it differs from what we thought last week. And Mr. Owner, you get to pick one. Mrs. Owner, you get to pick two, and we move on. Right? Let's figure out, how the project moves forward. And I think it streamlines the process so much better. We haven't had really any of those adversarial or controversial relationships with contractors in a long time. I mean, it's just not something you find in healthcare, because healthcare is so small. I mean, it's an intimate industry. Everybody, all the contractors. And I think that owners realize they're going to get value out of a relationship between a GC and an architect. That value, that definitely brings value to the project.
Absolutely. I know we've already kind of touched on this a little bit. I remember from my time in the industry, it was a little adversarial. From the time when I interned for a GC, that was certainly adversarial, and that was just a church project. And and then when I was with a subcontractor, the relationship was more with the GC first, and then in the background was the architect, with all of the smoke and mirrors and the person who we could never get access to. But I know we've already kind of touched on it a little bit, but in your opinion, from your perspective, what do you think the ideal contractor designer relationship looks like?
I describe this this relationship in many ways, in many factions, but at the end of the day, there's going to be hiccups on every project, right? There's going to be technical hiccups along the way, and we solve technical problems all day long. The contractor solves technical problems all day long. What we can't have is relational problems on a project where trust is lost. You feel like somebody's trying to get one over on you. So for me, the ideal relationship, you ready for this? Is going to sum it up, is that on that tough Thursday afternoon after we found something out, the contractor is the one I want to help solve the problem with me, and then we go to happy hour afterwards. That's the ideal relationship. We solve the problem, we maintain our relationship, and we compartmentalize that technical piece without blame or pointing fingers, and we solve the problem and we move on with our relationship.
Yeah,
that's ideal.
In my experience, it would happen on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
So
there you go. No, I will tell you, there's a we are progressing in our relationships with general contractors and with subcontractors. Our interior designers have a unique perspective, even with millwork and millwork subs. We do a lot of custom millwork and millwork design, and we have found it very helpful recently on a few projects to just simply have an on-site meeting with the fabricator, right? To show a document that gets intent, and then have a conversation and walk through it with the general contractor and with the sub on site together, looking through things, solving the problem, showing intent, discussing how connections work. I can detail it. I mean, I can draw a thing, 4 pages of details, and it might not match the shop drawings. It might need to get done a different way. And so what we like to do is we like to be conductors of the expertise. You get the expert who's that's their lane, that's their bread and butter, and you bring them to the table at the right time to get the right input and do it the right way. And in that level of communication, I think is important.
See,
I think
like
that right there. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I like that a lot because, we would just have meetings with the GC, and the GC would have meetings with the architect. We'd never be at the table at the same time. So thus, there's lines of communication that you would have to go through just to get the answers that you really wanted. So I think that, having a set weekly meeting with all of the stakeholders, owner included, that way you can get like a true picture of the project. There's full transparency. I think that goes a long way towards not only a successful project, but building great relationships for projects going forward.
We've talked about on other episodes, and just in general, like how inefficient our industry is in general. And I think you touched on maybe one of the most biggest issues that we have. I always thought the expert should be the expert. And, I always thought it was I would use this argument before and me being kind of a cockier intern, and I'd say, if I draw that window detail wrong, are you telling me the guy that's been doing it for 20 years is going to do it exactly the way that I drew it? Or is he going to say, that's wrong, I'm going to do what I do? Whereas for me, all I care about is it looks like this and it doesn't leak. That's all that matters to me. So do what you need to do. And so I do think, so much time and effort goes into these inefficiencies of, me drawing millwork. I'm not the expert in how it gets detailed. The guy or the girl that builds it is the expert. So I need to tell them it needs to be this big. It needs to have this, this is the overall look, and it needs to be this material. Go do that. And if we could get to more of that, and I think some of it comes to the adversarial part, that we have some of this like baggage from past baggage that we deal with of you have to draw that detail exactly right, because when that person screws it up, you need to be able to hang your hat on something. Like that statement is a statement I more or less have heard. We're already assuming that the expert is going to do it wrong. And we're assuming that we know everything about that project. And when we get past that, I think that is one small step, but could have great impacts in terms of building efficiency. So instead of spending 15 hours drawing details that no one is going to use, I can devote that time to doing more research or doing more energy analysis or having more, whatever it is.
I can't tell you how many RFIs I've written that like in that exact scenario, like the window details wrong. We should do it this way. I'm going to write this RFI just to make sure that we have everything documented. That way we can cover our, behind.
Yeah. Think about the time that you waste as a contractor. Be like, that's not right. Let me show you how it is. This is what it looks like. And then Josh, you'd be like, yeah, go ahead, do that. And we wasted your time, my time, Josh's time, so inefficient.
I have an adversarial question. In a post-pandemic world, how much ceiling space will you provide?
Yeah.
He's saying that as didn't you work for a mechanical subcontractor?
Yeah, I'm just stinking your chain.
And I will promise you that on every project, it's 3 inches less than you need. Every project, it will just every project.
So what do you think in this post-pandemic world, which I like, we say it's post-pandemic, who knows when that actually happens? We're still in it.
Yeah.
Whether it's from the design perspective or even the relationship with the contractor, can you pinpoint maybe one major thing you think is going to change in terms of how you do your job on a day-to-day?
Well, that's a great question. One major thing that's going to change, I I think is collaboration. I think that we've all learned in the past year and a half that we can do heads down work at our homes, and we can do heads down work um, uh, here at our desks in our home offices, as you guys are too. It's that collaboration piece that it's going to become intentional. When we get together with people on a job site or in a meeting room, the collaboration is going to be intentional. It's not going to be a byproduct just because we were in the office together, we had collaboration. I think the biggest change, again, is going to be that there will be an increased level of collaboration because there has to be. But I think it's going to be the intentionality of that will be heightened.
I would say during this period of time, I mean, as tough as it's been for everyone, you've also seen what amazing things could happen when you had a bunch of people come together and just put their mind towards, we're going to accomplish this thing, whatever it is. And there has been some nice aspects to it. So, okay. So now, we planned out the design. We talked a little bit about functional scenarios are really going to maybe further drive how we design this idea of flexibility. We talk about how we're trying to get more towards target value design, so we don't have to, utter those terrible words of value engineering later on. That always bothered me. Like, we would design buildings with the intention of value engineering them later, which just is such a waste of time. And we could talk forever about how our industry could be more efficient. But so the last thing is, okay, how do you see us facilitating the design differently over the last, so many years, even if throughout your career moving forward? You sort of mentioned big box, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think we're seeing an evolution in building typology and building usage. Healthcare systems are making moves because it's more expensive to deliver care on a hospital campus than it is on an outpatient campus. So hospitals are pushing outpatient services to outpatient campuses where it's more appropriate, being better stewards of folks' money, being better stewards of the industry's money, to deliver that care off campus in a less acute setting. So hospitals are doing that. We're also seeing globalization and decentralization happening at the same time, to where you have health systems acquiring more hospitals, they're acquiring more existing facilities. And then the decentralization part is that is happening in rural areas, especially here in Georgia. We just heard of several. I've heard of Piedmont's purchase of 4 other hospital systems, right? So they have hospitals now that are outside of the metro area. So they're decentralizing their footprint. They're spreading that out across the states, but they're very intentional about their location. So that globalization is happening and it's decentralizing at the same time. So it's going to require a greater level of service and a larger level of adaptability in professional services to address those kinds of things. So we're seeing that. And then the other piece you talked about, it's a little bit of a retrofit of suburbia, right? These big box stores, these malls, retail took a huge hit last year. So a lot of retail stores are now transitioning into other space types, serving other markets. One of our largest projects right now is the Emory health system, is putting all of its shared administrative resources in one space. And it's an old mall, right? So it's an old Sears store, an old Kohl's store. It's a lot of square footage, and it's perfect for shared administrative spaces. It increases collaboration. It brings them from, I think they're in 6 different locations all over the city, bringing them under one roof. So it's exciting for them because they get to see people that they've only emailed, they've worked with their entire careers at Emory. They're going to be sitting next to them or sitting across the hall from them, down the hall from them. So allowing that to happen. We're seeing that also with healthcare spaces. There's a project in Nashville, 100 Oaks, where Vanderbilt did the same thing. It connected retail and clinical spaces in one location. We're seeing that all over the country. We just did an RFP down in South Florida for an old Toys R Us store, right? They're retrofitting Toys R Us to have a 22,000 square foot clinic inside of an old Toys R Us. So we're seeing these dark shells come to life again, but they're coming to life with different uses. They're coming to life with healthcare spaces, whether that's clinical or administrative, workplace design. We're just seeing it happen across the board, which is exciting, right? Because all of these, it's perfect for sustainability. These spaces already exist. We're not adding to the building stock or pulling any additional energies that aren't needed. So those are 2 or 3 things we're seeing kind of happen across the country, from the Northeast all the way down to Miami. We're seeing a lot of those things on this side.
As a 90s kid, the idea of an empty Toys R Us just makes me sad.
It hurts.
Makes me so sad.
Yeah, even here in San Antonio, when I went to go get my vaccine, I didn't really know where I was going. I just put the address in the map that my wife told me to go to, and
go here and get your vaccine.
Yeah, I pull up and it's an old shopping mall, and I walk in, and for the most part, it's foot doctor, all these different kinds of doctors, and I go up the escalator. This mall looks like it was, straight out of Stranger Things, 1980s style mall. And I go there and I get my vaccine in one space, and then the next space over is a GameStop. So like they're still kind of in between, but even here, that's what's happening.
They're a little in between. You're right. We're seeing that as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's one nearby that was an old Subway and a Verizon store connected, and they gutted it out, and it's a Wellstar building, which I think ties back into the very first thing we started talking about, was the idea of functional scenarios. And so we're seeing how other building typologies need to consider, how will this evolve into its use outside of what I'm doing today? The Subway, the guy that created that building over there probably never thought it was going to be a doctor's office. But if we think about those things now, knowing that it could be, or it could become an office space or a shared workspace, I think that it all kind of goes full circle. And it is interesting to see, because I mean, I know when I worked with Paul, he had a shopping mall that turned into like a health park. We're going to see more of that.
House and Medical Pavilion. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And so, we see a lot of that. So it makes me feel good that we're reusing these spaces. We probably could reuse them a little better if we were able to project these functional scenarios. I worked on a project that took a Best Buy and turned it into a church. And they found out it worked great, because Best Buy just happened to have the right bay distance. And I mean, then they started saying, hey, where are there other Best Buys that we could buy? So it is all very cool. Anything, Jackson, do you have anything you want to ask before we start?
You said that, and I was just like, man, I feel like Best Buys could turn into a lot of really cool things.
Yeah.
Big box stores, they have a lot of real estate. There's a lot of room. Yeah. High ceilings.
And what we found actually is a lot of those, their ceiling, the roofs were over-engineered a bit. And so they could support things like, in this case, it was hanging lights for theatrical lights. But the structures were overdeveloped a bit and over-engineered. And so that helps. So now I could put bigger mechanical equipment on the roof if I need, or I could hang things if I have to.
Yep.
And they're all open, right? So you really have a fairly clean, and it's fairly modular in terms of, the grids and everything. And so it makes sense why big boxes become the go-to for any of these other typologies. Well, I think it's been interesting because, again, we see one, I mean, I always knew you were heavily focused on the research, the evidence-based side. But it's interesting to get the perspective of, how you've seen things change to this point, how we see them move forward. And from what it kind of sounds like, and maybe it's just maybe where you are, we're doing those things. We're already kind of using functional scenarios. We're kind of already dealing with a contractor. We're already retrofitting suburbia. But now maybe post-pandemic, it opens our eyes to, okay, we never saw that coming. What other things do we not see coming? And planning for that. And so maybe it does, because I'm sure there was a period of time where we thought that could never happen. There may be somebody that thought about what happens if the whole entire world had a problem, and then somebody said, yeah, that's never going to happen. Or if it does, healthcare design is probably the last thing we need to worry about.
Or if it does, we're not going to pay for it right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a good point. We have to, and so that maybe as a wrap up, how do you balance, we tie all this in, how do we balance this idea of designing for the future, functional scenarios, yet managing to a today budget? And are there funds? Are we having to think through stuff that's ultimately going to maybe never pay out a direct return on investment?
That is a great wrap-up question, and I talk about this quite often the first time we meet clients, or the first time we're interviewing employees even. We talk about this concept of stewardship, which to me is an ethical responsibility of taking care of someone else's resources, whether that's your client's time, money, and budget, whether that's your employees' time or budget, or whether that's your company's time that you're spending, or your company's dollar that you're spending to get work. We talk about stewardship in a broader sense as an ethical responsibility, and I think it ties directly to that. I think that's, if we're being good stewards of, good stewards of the earth, good stewards of our environmental resources, good stewards of our energy, then I think all of that's how we balance that conversation. Where yes, we have functional scenarios that we're planning for in the future. These things may include exorbitant amount of cost on the front end, but let's talk about it. Let's bring it to the forefront. Let's run through an exercise, see what it looks like, and then we all can decide together of how we steward those resources. And I think if everyone approaches it from the stewardship, almost a servant leadership kind of perspective, then we're more suited to solve those problems up front. And if we don't, and choosing not to solve a particular functional scenario is a choice. And we can, Jackson, we do that all the time. We say, hey, we could plan for this functional scenario. The chances of us having an earthquake in this region are pretty slim. So we don't have those kinds of resources in place. And then there are other areas where we over design intentionally because we want to have an increased safety factor, right? So it's I think it all goes back to that stewardship, being a good steward of the resources that you have on hand at the time. And that's a broad sense that goes from money, time, to resources, to energy. So Chris, I think that's a loaded question and a full one, but stewardship is something we talk about a lot, and I think it would cover that quite a bit.
That was a great answer.
Good way to end it.
Yeah, I have not thought about it from that perspective. I mean, I've never been an architect, but if I was an architect, I'd come at it with that attitude. That was great.
Well, Josh, I appreciate you joining us. I know it took us a while to get this scheduled, but it's been a good one.
Guys. Yeah, thank you. It's been fun, making me think.